What is the single most important substance needed for you to exist as a human being?
Water.
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 Maybe it's water.
Water, I guess.
Water.
Could it be water?
Water? Water. That's it.
As human beings, no one can deny that water is a necessity. But if you look at the facts, our actions are poisoning our greatest natural resource. Before we look at the contaminants and how they enter our waterways, let's observe the Earth's circulation of the water supply, known as the hydrologic cycle. This gigantic system, powered by energy from the sun, provides a link between the oceans and the waters of the continents. As illustrated here, water from the oceans and continents evaporates into the atmosphere. Wind transports this moisture-laden air until climatic processes form clouds. Eventually, precipitation takes place, and for water that falls into the ocean, the hydrologic processes repeats the cycle. The precipitation that falls onto land, however, must make it back to other bodies of water. The forces acting upon and beneath the Earth's surface are important to understand when we discuss the migration of contaminating elements in water. Once water has fallen onto land, a portion of it percolates into the ground. This is known as infiltration, which is the primary source for all subsurface water. This groundwater provides drinking water for over 50% of the United States. It also provides 40% of water used for irrigation and 26% of industry's needs. Let's take a closer look at the distribution and movement of groundwater. Once water enters the soil, it penetrates downward until it reaches a zone where all sediment and rock are completely filled with water. This is known as the zone of saturation. The upper limit of this zone is called the water table. Contrary to what the name implies, the water table is rarely level. In fact, it usually mimics the shape of the surface topography, as seen here. During a drought, the water table may fall enough to dry up wells and streams, as demonstrated here. The lowering of water tables may also result from man-made devices such as wells. As seen here, heavy pumping lowered the water table and caused the shallow wells to dry. Whenever water is drawn from a well, the water table in the vicinity of the well is lowered. This area is known as a cone of depression. Since the hydrologic gradient is increased here, groundwater will flow more rapidly toward the opening. Once we introduce contamination to groundwater, it is obvious how a highly productive but poorly placed well could contaminate a pre-existing water well.
Citizens should be real concerned about monitoring the quality of the water they drink, because if they don't look out for their own health, no one else will. There's a potential for groundwater contamination from a large variety of sources. And if you're on a private water well, the state does not come out and do any monitoring of your water well. So if you have suspicions that your water may be contaminated, it's up to you to make sure you have it tested and determine what is in it. And then after you determine what is in it, you have to make the decision whether or not you're going to drink that water.
Sources of contamination range from private septic tanks to barnyard and backyard waste to pesticides.
Water quality in northeast Louisiana is primarily very good in the aspect of toxic contamination. We do have some problems with water quality, and most of those are due to effects of non-point source pollution. In the last 50 years, most of the bottomland hardwoods in the Delta area up here in northeast Louisiana has been cleared and converted to cropland. Runoff from cropland is characteristically high in solids, high in nutrients, and can carry pesticides as well. This affects the water quality greatly. There are efforts underway now on the state and federal level to alter the practices that farmers use in doing their business and to lessen the impacts of non-point source pollution.
Louisiana's 1991 pesticide-induced fish kill was estimated at 1 million. Although the improper application of the pesticide AZM was responsible for the deaths of the fish, the Department of Agriculture and Forestry claimed that the kills had been acts of God because thunderstorms had followed the AZM applications. With this type of attitude taken by some state departments, it is obvious that we as private citizens must step in and protect ourselves. The Earth's hydrologic cycle is a continuous loop of water in various forms. Once contamination is introduced to that loop, can the original condition be restored once an attempt at removing the contamination is made? It is paramount that we remember that this resource, which is vital to life, has its limits.
Even though groundwater is a renewable resource, it does have finite limits. Groundwater flows very, very slowly in the subsurface. For example, water in the 400 or 600 foot sand beneath Baton Rouge may be 500 to 10,000 years old. And as such, to flush out a contaminant problem takes a long time to do it naturally. So the key here is to keep it the way it is and not try to clean it up after the fact.
More threatening to our larger aquifers and surface waters are hazardous materials which may leak from pipelines, storage tanks, oil field waste holding ponds, and landfills. The following are water bodies in Louisiana which are known to be affected by toxic pollutants. Land disposal systems such as holding ponds and landfills are now required to have impervious liners used to prevent leakage of the pollutants, known as leachate, into the ground and ultimately the underlying aquifers. There is a problem with the liner solution, however. Manufacturers admit that once the material that makes up the liners comes into contact with the leachate, immediately the composition of the liner begins breaking down, and it is just a matter of time before it gives way to the pressures from above. As mentioned earlier, leaky underground storage tanks and pipelines are also sources of groundwater contamination. The village of Gilbert, Louisiana was recently a victim of underground storage tank contamination. The entire town's water supply was shut down by DEQ until new wells were drilled.
In March of 1992, the latter part of March, it was discovered that we had benzene in our town water supply. On April the 1st, we received a direct order from DEQ to shut down our town water system. So consequently, we had to look for an alternative method of supplying water to all of our water customers. DEQ determined that the contamination was coming from some underground gasoline storage tanks adjacent to the present water system. The tanks were underground for approximately 10 years, but we don't know exactly how long they had been leaking. Individuals with water wells are most vulnerable to groundwater contamination.
Unlike public water supply systems, individual water wells are shallow and untested. To make matters worse, these rural areas are usually the targets when siting surface impoundments, oil and gas drilling and production pits, and landfills.
As you can see, we have contaminants just from the oil just sitting on top of the ground right here. If you go down deep 20 feet, there's a heavy concentration of hazardous oil field waste. And then we had this place tested and came up with the toluenes, the benzene, the parts per million. And we submitted this information to the EPA Superfund. We got turned down because one of the main reasons is there wasn't a heavy enough concentration of people in this area. But we still have people dying of cancer. If people are dying of cancer because of this pit, I feel like something should be done about it. Whether there's 1,000 people, whether there's 10 or 15 or 20 people, whoever's affected by a site such as this, and we didn't get any money out of this thing. We haven't got anything but death and cancer.
Various state agencies have identified categories of facilities that are causing groundwater contamination in Louisiana. The #1 source is surface impoundments. The PPG facility near the Olin plant has contamination under most of the plant site and down into the Chico aquifer. Oil and gas drilling and production pits are also known to contaminate water. The Gulf Coast Superfund site has 3 pits containing oil field waste. Waste has leaked from the pits and contaminated the groundwater with heavy metals and volatile organic compounds. Other contributors to contamination are abandoned hazardous waste sites and abandoned wells. Many companies go out of business and leave their waste problems behind. Solid waste landfills also cause groundwater contamination. The city of Covington, Louisiana, had leachate boiling to the surface of its landfill and migrating downward into the groundwater. Industrial and hazardous waste landfills are found contaminating our water throughout Louisiana. All 4 commercial hazardous waste landfills in Louisiana have caused groundwater contamination. The contamination of one in Baton Rouge extends down to 300 feet. Other sources of contamination are waste injection wells. There are over 4,000 of these in Louisiana. As mentioned earlier, the application of pesticides and handling of pesticide waste have also been proven to cause contamination. The most well-known cases of contamination in Louisiana involve Cancer Alley. Known also as the Chemical Corridor, this stretch of land on the Mississippi River is home to over 50 petrochemical plants. Smaller communities which depend on the river for drinking water are very susceptible to contamination from spills or illegal discharges, which are common occurrences. In recent years, the Louisiana State Police received over 250 reports of spills or accidents per year at these plants. More frightening is the question of how many spills, accidents, and discharges occur undetected. And if the governor of this beautiful state believes Cancer Alley is a myth, do his appointees in reinforcement agencies feel likewise?
The individual citizens live and breathe and work in the area that are contaminated and potentially contaminated. The politicians are there to make sure that there are enough jobs to go around, and a lot of times they'll turn their head the other way when it's a question of contamination versus jobs, because their constituents, and they envision their constituents wanting more jobs and not balancing the jobs with protection of the environment.
The environmental problems we are now facing will not disappear. They have been here for decades and are growing. Thanks to individual efforts begun 10 years ago, environmental issues are now getting attention.
It is up to you and I, the citizens of Louisiana, to stop this chain of greed and denial, which is slowly leading to the destruction of this sportsman's paradise. We can do this by acting locally.
Water conservation in the home is a good start. If every American home installed faucet aerators, we would save over 250 million gallons of water a day. A single household could save 20,000 gallons of water a year by not leaving the water running while brushing teeth, shaving, and washing dishes. When disposing of household hazardous wastes, such as paints, drain cleaners, pesticides, etc., do so properly. Ask local government leaders to provide proper disposal facilities, or contact a disposal company licensed to handle such wastes. Dumping these products down drains or into the soil is the worst way to dispose of them. Avoid purchasing products laden with hazardous substances if less harmful alternatives are available.
0150.
Y'all had a good turnout so far?
Once your household is water friendly, move on to the community. Spread the word that you care. Join organizations that promote the environment and tackle ecological issues. Take note of local and state politicians' stance on these issues and regulations. Help identify possible problem sites by reporting abandoned or suspicious storage yards or tanks.
We must maintain the high water standard to keep what we have intact. Because remember, once we contaminate something, we never clean it back up to the original condition. Forget that. We have a lot of water, especially in some parts of the state, a lot of groundwater, but it's not infinite. There's a finite limit of what we have. And I, for one, don't want to start creating dead zones where we have contaminated our groundwater supply to a point where we can't use it. We're blessed here in Louisiana. I want to maintain that for my kids and their kids and on down the line. I don't want some great-great-grandchild to come back and say, boy, I sure wish my great-great-granddad had done something differently so that I would have water to drink. I don't want to be thought of in that light.
One person can make a difference. Let's stop the destruction of our natural resources and protect the quality of our groundwater for the generations to come. Leaving it up to others just doesn't seem to work.